Let's go ahead and download Git. The reason we're going to download the Git tool is because in order to use GitHub locally on your machine that you're using to code or create your text or whatever you want to upload, whatever type of project you want to upload to GitHub, you need to have Git installed. So if you plan on using several different machines, you're going to want to know ahead of time as you plan the install. For example, are you going to use just one machine? One virtual machine with Windows, a Mac? Or do you plan to use a Unix machine, a Mac, and a Windows virtual machine? You're going to want to know that beforehand. Okay, so in order to get the download, we'll go to git-scm.com/downloads. Now this is the download area for several different operating systems. For these purposes, I'm going to download the Windows version and install it on my Windows virtual machine. There are also clients, and there's also information about updating a previously installed version of Git, maybe an older version. Now as you drill into the Windows piece, it'll show several beta versions, and the top will be the newest. You can tell by the date, and usually the size is a little bit more. So this has the newest features. You'll want to click that file name. It's going to bring you to your download screen. You'll want to click this. Now I've already gone ahead and downloaded it, and it's in my downloads folder. So when you click to download this, it's just going to give you a little box to save it, and you're going to want to know where that goes. You may have to search for the file name, but for this purpose, it went to my download file. So as I said before, the Git tool is used to upload your projects and your code up into GitHub. So if you do plan to use different types of machines, you're going to want to know as you do this install. You can go ahead and click through the defaults, but you're going to want to take a look at what kind of options you have initially, as it's always easier to set it up now than to change it later. So you double click the install icon, and the first couple screens are just license information. Now this one, for this one I'm going to take the defaults, but you're going to want to know, if you want to add additional icons in your quick launch on your desktop, you can select that. I'm going to have it integrate with my Windows Explorer. Now this is important as well. If you do use a Windows version and you do use find and sort commands, you don't want to select the bottom version, the bottom selection. So read through these and decide, do you want to be conservative? You have issues with the stability? Are you doing other things? Maybe you don't want to modify your path, which is the way the Git tool changes behind the scenes, changes your setup so that you can use it without having to go to the different directories and move around and change directories. You can just use the tool. This is also if you want to just use it from the command prompt. Now I plan on using the tools, all the tools that come with this, so I'm going to use this option. This option is also important if you plan to use cross-platform projects. Windows, recommended setting for Windows, recommended setting on Unix. And this option would be if you're not choosing this option is not recommended for cross-platform projects. So in my case, I do plan to use cross-platforms down the road. So we'll check out the Windows style. So when we commit the text files in cross-platform projects, this is recommended setting on Windows. So this is the recommended setting for Windows. And we'll click Next. Okay, this is purely informational, and I do want to continue anyways. It's not going to affect anything. So this will take a little while to install when you do it. It's one of those walk away and get a coffee type installs. So we'll give it some time, and then we'll talk about some of the features after the install is completed. Okay, we're almost finished here. And we're going to go ahead and talk about some of the options in this install. Then we also want to verify that it is set up before we start trying to use it. If you go to Program Files, under Git, you're going to see Git Bash and Git GUI. Now, this is why we selected the option to update the path. This gives you a nice screen rather than having to open up the DOS window and move around and go to the bin file and kick it off there and look for commands. This is all its own window, which is great. So you can, as it says, if you get lost when you first open it, Git help will show you some of the basic messages. So Git version, that's the greatest way to just make sure you have the version you got. You've installed the version you downloaded. And another part of this, we'll talk about more of this later. Oops. But there is a Git, Git GUI that will, instead of using the command line interface, the Git GUI will allow you to do a few things here, which is always great. So we will talk about these as we go through our commands, but this is another feature you have. So to summarize, we learned how to install Git, and we went ahead and downloaded the Git executable and installed it in a Windows virtual machine and walked through the shell, if you tick that option, and some of the options, we walked through some of the other options to install. And that sums up our installation module. Now that we have Git installed, we're going to talk about checking the Git version. Now, maybe you haven't used Git for a while, or maybe you're not sure if it's on this machine. So there's ways to look around. We'll explore a couple ways here. So we're going to explore opening up a couple different prompts and checking the versions, and talk about why, what we can do once we check them. So this is a command prompt from Windows, and typically Unix and Linux have the same command prompts, DOS prompt. Now if you drill into Program Files and you see Git is there, from bin or from /bin or from regular Git, you can do a Git space dash version. That'll tell you the version on that machine. If you get any kind of error, you may want to check to see you're in the correct file, folder, and check to see if it's in your path. It's possible that it is installed, but it's just not seeing it. I would say 90% of the time, if you see an error, it's not there and you want to reinstall it. Now, once you have the version, you can go to where we installed it from, git-sem.com/downloads. And if you drill into there, you can check the version. So for example, if you have Git 1.7.8, you're probably going to want to go ahead and upgrade to the latest version. Another place you can check is if you install the Git tools during the install, your bash shell is where you probably want to go to do most of your Git work. And the same thing, git-version. So what we did here is we checked the version and talked about the version itself and what you could do once you found out if you had it or not. And so just remember, if you get any kind of error message, you're going to want to just go through the git install again and double check your version. You want to probably be up to the latest version. And that's it for the version module. Let's review the config command. The config command is what you'll use after you initially install Git for the first time, or if you haven't used Git in a while on that machine and you want to see what is set up initially. Before we check the setup, we'll talk about some of the features you can use the config command for. A big feature is identity. You're going to want to, as you use the Git tool to commit your code and send anything up to GitHub and bring things down from GitHub, what you want to do is have a good idea would be to have your username and email address. And once you do this with the config command globally, Git will always use that information for anything you do in the system. So some people don't necessarily use GitHub for, entirely for code. Some people use it to keep track of XML files, text files, documents. Globally, using this option will allow you to have your name and email address associated with everything you put up there. So let's do that. So you want to associate, sorry about that. So you want to use git config, and we'll use the global setting, user name, for my example I'll use John Doe, and now we're going to change we're going to change the email, and you can, if you hit the up arrow, it'll give you the entire command. We'll go ahead and just type it, git config global, and this will be user email. Now, other things to change would be what type of diff tool you're using, editor, the colors on your tools, in your files, in your editors. So to check your settings, so if you look here, we'll see the color diff is auto. We could alter that. Username John Doe, user email John Doe. That's what we just add those. And you can also edit things such as Windows editor compared to Unix editors if you're using in Unix Emacs or VI. There's different end-of-line characters you may want to watch out for. So there's many settings for the config file, the config command, sorry. And what you want to do is, I guess, so for initially when you set it up, I think the best thing would be to go with the default settings and add your name and email address, and then maybe look into changing the colors and a little bit more initially. And this concludes our discussion around the config command. Let's talk about the init command in Git. So now, once you have Git installed and you want to create a repository, we're going to talk about what the init command does. We're going to learn about what the init command does, and then we're going to walk through some examples and see firsthand. So basically, to create Git, to initialize a new project, you want to type the command git init. I'm not going to actually do it in at this command prompt, the DOS window, but you want to be in the directory you want to do it to create this repository. And I'm going to run it from the shell tool. So if you're not in the directory in there, take a look and see if you have a a Git or GitHub or projects directory. Change to that directory and then run your git init. So now you see how it says master. So now it's showing us it created that repository. Down the road, if you run it again, it's not going to remove anything that's there. It just might look to see what else is out there. It might, it's not going to overwrite, but it may pull in newly added templates. Or if you want to specify a different place to maybe move this repository, you could use git init, separate or separate git directory. And inside here, there's going to be a .git directory. You can't see it when you list it out. This is your project setup. And as far as with GitHub, what you'll do is you will create your projects locally, and then you'll commit them, and you'll be able to push them up to GitHub to other machines, vice versa, pull down from GitHub. And so it's not going to overwrite anything, it's not going to erase anything, it's just what you do to set up your initial project. And that's all for the init command. Let's talk about commit. So in Git, in order to use version controlling and set up your projects and use your projects and upload projects to GitHub, move projects to other machines, commit helps you with version controlling. So commit is a snapshot. You can use commit You can look at previous commits. You can roll back to previous projects, restore. So commit's very powerful. We're going to learn what we can do with commit, and then we're actually going to do some, walk through some different options and examples with commit. So you can do it from the command line, and you're going to want to be in your master directory that you created when you installed Git and ran the init command. So rather than do the DOS command prompt, I'm going to go ahead and open up my Git bash shell, and it comes right into my master. I have a file here I created called ed.test, and to add that to the project, first we'll create another test file to show you how to do that. So in here I'm going to use VI as my editor, and I'll create an ed1.test and just insert something in there. I inserts, escape on a Windows keyboard, shift colon, right quit, exclamation point will save that. If you get any errors there, you probably don't have correct access to the directory, so check on that. So now you do an ls and you see both files here. So let me add this to the project. Git add ed1.test. So now if I go to my directory and what I can do now is do a commit git commit minus M will allow you to put it in a message. So let's go with test project. So this message is committed in to your project. And it helps you track your project. So if you have several, dozens of projects, you can have different names, you can track them. So now we see we have a commit message test project. So we successfully edited that file, as you saw, and when we committed and we used that message test, we call it test project, we see now that it added that into that directory. Another important command with commit is git status. So if you look at git status, oops. So you see the mistake I made there. I ran git status not in the master. I was in the .git directory, and it gave me an error message. Fatal, must be running a work tree. So you just want to come out of there. So you see the git status will tell you if there's something that's sitting staged waiting to be committed. So thinking about commit and version control, you've got the initial untracked document, ed.test, unmodified. You added it, git space add ed.test, not modified. If you edit it in any way, it gets staged. So before it gets committed, it's in a staged state. So if you do a git status, you're going to see at the bottom what's being staged. So let's do another sample right here, another test. So let's try ed.2, insert a test, save it. We'll add it. So notice up top, and I didn't mean to be confusing, but I was using the up arrow to go through past commands. So I kind of walked through that pretty fast. Sorry about that. Look up top. So I did a status again, and you see in green, new file, ed2.test. So it keeps track of, once you add it, it has it there. If you modify it, it's still to be staged. If you commit it, it updates that as well. See, so we committed again, same message. It told me it added that new file. You see it's not staged anymore. So now if we wanted to change the file, we'd have to commit it again. So let's think of the staged commit as a buffer. You know, when you stage it, you're putting it to a buffer with git add. And the buffer will stay there until you execute git commit. And git status will also show you what's sitting there waiting. And that's it for the commit command. Just to review, we learned what commit actually does with version controlling and snapshots, and we walked through some examples of commit, and there is also a git status -s flag. Sorry about that. It would help if I typed the correct commands in. And now I'm out of the tree. This just kind of gives you an overall explanation of files and files that were added. And as far as commit, there's also a commit that you don't have to run the commit -m every time either. You can run a commit -a, which will commit everything that's being staged. And that's if you don't want to add any kind of special message to it. And the -a stands for automatic, so it automatically stages all tracked modified files before the commit. So it kind of skips over the add and then commit commands and just does all created files that are staged, commits them all. So to review, we talked about what commit does. We talked about add before the commit to create your file. We talked a little bit about VI options. If you don't know VI or whatever editor you're going to use, at least know enough to create a file, and you need to learn a little bit, enough to get around to create files for your project. We also talked about the status command and how you can use that to your advantage. There's a few different options, and commit has a few different options. And that's the end of the piece about the commit command. The git diff command helps you compare changes to files and find out what state files are in. We're going to talk about what the diff file is, and then we're going to go through a couple examples of what it does. So the diff command is useful to look at changes in Git. It can show you changes between working copies in your repository and changes with staged commits and working copies. You can view changes you just made to your repository. Maybe you haven't committed them yet. So first, let's take a look at our shell for Git. And I just opened up you opened up the tool at the command from the start prompt and the Git tool. If you didn't install the tool, you can use the regular DOS prompt. Just go to the directory the Git is installed in. So first, let's take a file we've already committed. I'm going to take ed.test and I'm going to vi ed.test. This will bring up my editor file or editor program, and I'm going to use O command to open up a new line, and we'll add some text. Escape pound WQ to save it with this exclamation point. Just checking here to make sure it's been saved. I see today's date and time. So a typical git diff is going to show you that this file was updated, and the green text shows you what was actually changed. This comes in very handy with picture a document, code, XML. This will pinpoint what's been changed. Now, a useful flag that will help you view the difference between what you've staged and what is in your repository is the cached flag. So we can do git diff and use the cached flag. And for this example, nothing has actually been cached recently. However, if I go through and add the file to be committed to the staging, for example, git add the new ed.test, I do a git diff on the cached, now I'm going to see that this is in the cache area. So that could also come in useful. So just to review, you can use the diff command to see what changes have been made recently and to see what state. Was this file staged? Was it already added to be staged, but maybe not committed? Or also track changes that were made in the file more recently. And that's it for the diff command. Another useful command is git log. So if you use the command line, or if you want to open up, like me, your git shell from your project master directory, git log is going to show you in chronological order your commits. So your output with no arguments is going to show commits in the repository in reverse chronological order. Recent commits will show up first. Now, a couple things you can also do with it. You can use a stat flag. The stat flag is going to show you, there's a stat option. It's going to print the commit entry, a list of modified files, how many files were changed in that list, and how many lines in the files were added or removed. So in this case, 1. Now, another good option you can use is the pretty option. This will give you a little bit different output. And I did the wrong, it's supposed to be equals. So that gives you a little different output instead of, it's just, it changes the log output and formats to formats other than default. And you can take that and use the format flag to give you a little nicer output if the above output is kind of hard for you to read. You can also, if you've got commits for the last 6 months, you can limit your log output. So you can say since, until as options. So for example, git log since 2 weeks. So that's everything in the last 2 weeks. This allows you to pull in more recent things or search, maybe before 2 weeks. Which would be nothing, because this is a recently created repository. You can also grep. Now John Doe created this file, so we should be able to grep for Doe. Let's try test for our test project, and there we go. So we talked about what git log is, and then went through some examples of what it can do. It can be very powerful. You can create scripts that run out and pull the log information and pull it into different tools. And ultimately you want to be able to know just information fast and keep your local repository clean and ready to go and upload to GitHub. This concludes our topic for the log command. All right, let's talk about the git remove command. So, what we're going to learn about the remove command and a couple different options it has. And we're going to do some examples and look at what the outcome actually is from the command. So, you can be at the git/bin directory for wherever you installed it if you like to do command line. I'm going to open up the git bash window for my git shell. Now the first thing we're going to do here is let's create a test file. So I use VI, any test editor will do. Test.test. And okay, insert some information. Now if I do an ls, I see the file. If I do a git space status with a -s flag, I'll see it at the bottom of the list on disk. So now let's go ahead and put it into the staged section. So we'll do a git add space test.test. Run my status command again. Now you can see it's up here waiting to be committed. So now to remove, we've got a couple options here. So I just do a git rm for remove, file name. What I want to do is I have two options: the cached flag or the -f to force. So -f will force removal entirely. The cached flag will keep the file and put it back down to the lower state, to the unstaged, just to the disk. So let's try this out. First we'll remove it. Out of the staged piece. And run the status command, it's back at the bottom. Now let's try it, let's just add it back up to the top again, to the staged portion. Sorry. Now you see it staged. So I just push my up arrow to go through older commands, or you could retype. Now let's try to just force it out. And if you do a status for that, you see totally gone. Those are your two choices. Now there's also a git move command. It will remove it with a -cached flag. To put it back down to disk, rename the file and then add it back up behind the scenes. So the git move command behind the scenes just does a remove from the cached staging area, rename, and put it back up into staging with an add command. So just to review, we learned about the remove command and a couple different pieces, a couple different flags, depending on where it is. If it's just on the disk, you just use basic command line commands window or Unix based to delete it. But if it's promoted into the cached region, that's when you'd use the git remove commands, the cached or the F to force. We also looked at the status and add commands as we walked through it. And that concludes our piece on the git remove command. talk about the git status command. So we're going to learn what the git status command is, and then we'll do some examples to walk through what we can learn from using the git status command, what we can do with it. You can either use the command line interface, in this case it would be a DOS prompt, or if you're at a Unix command line or a terminal window, or if you've installed the tools, you can go to your git shell and so git status. Basic git status command brings up all the information you can walk through up top, changes to be committed, and gives you a little information if you want to unstage untracked files. So these are things that haven't been committed yet. Stage to anything. Now git status minus S gives you a little bit less detail than all of this. And it shows you what's staged and what hasn't been staged. So if you want to find out what code's ready to be staged and hasn't, you can look at that. If you have a file that's ready to be staged, and let's just quickly edit the file. I use VI to edit my files, but there's other text editors you can use instead if you'd like. Now if you take a look up here, you notice above the command had just the green M. If you hadn't yet used git add to commit the file and did more changes, you'll see it lets you know there's been other changes since. So to review, we've talked about the status command by itself, and it gives you some help, lets you know where the files are, and then the -s flag, and we also changed one file to show you how you can tell if things have been changed but not yet committed. And that's it for our status command. Let's talk about the git stash command. So we're going to learn what the stash command does, and then we're going to walk through some samples of different reasons you might want to use stash. So in a nutshell, git stash is for when you're working on code in your project and you get pulled away. There's another issue you have to go to, and you use this command just to stash everything so that you can come back to it later and work on it. So it stashes it in your project. It hasn't been committed and hasn't been unstaged. It's just wrapped into your project for a later date. So from your command line, git/bin directory wherever you installed it, or from the git shell, let's take a look at this. So we'll do a git status -s. And right now we see we have add.test. It's staged. So let's take and add add.txt. So now we've got a couple up top here. We just added one. They're both staged. So now I'm being pulled away. I've got a production issue. All hands on deck. So git stash and it's going to take the top two and it lets you know where it saved it. Test project is now at this. So now if I do a git stash list when I come back, the production issue is over, I'm back. What did I do again? A new window, let's check it out. Oh, okay. That's what I stashed in my test project. And now you want to quickly start working again, but get it out of that project. So git stash apply. We'll drop it back out of the project. And it kind of shows you here. New file ed.txt, modified ed.test because it had been modified. And it puts them back where they were. Now another command you could do is to drop. So it's in the project. Instead of putting it back the way it was, we just want to drop what we were doing. I don't recall what I was doing. I just want to start from scratch. I know I stashed it, but so that would be git stash and then drop. If we had just stashed it again. And let's just actually try that right now. Git and stash. So I'm being call away again. And now I return. I don't really know what I was doing, so let's just drop it. Whatever we did there, let's just drop it out of there. And there you go. And they're totally dropped. Now, other options are if you stash several, 3, 4, 5, maybe even more, and you want to just drop a couple or apply a couple. You can actually specify which one you want to apply and carefully do that. So it's really recommended to, as you go, as you stage, don't stage too many and have to stash. After you stage a few, you want to keep them in the or put them in the project, commit them. If you have a lot of stuff that's staged and you have to stash it, it's going to be very confusing. You have to go through and select each one. So to review, we talked about the stash command overall, learned what features it had, and we did some actual examples and walked through what we could do with it. And that concludes our stash discussion. Now let's take a look at the git reset command. So we're going to learn a few things about the reset command, and then we're going to do some examples. So after you commit some staged files, not stashed files, but you actually went and committed them, but you've decided now you want to roll them back, or you've got a couple different machines and you're ready to commit and roll some information up to GitHub, but for whatever reason you want to roll back your last commit, or you want to clean up the project. Here's a couple options that will help you out. Now this is the command line interface where git bin directory runs the commands. I like to open up my git shell with bash, git bash, and it's my project shell, my directory. So let's talk about, first let's take a look at what we have. And you see we have new.txt staged. So let's go ahead and walk through committing this and then resetting, and walk through a couple examples. So We're going to commit -a with an M for message. We'll just say test commit. That was successful. Gives you a little information about that. You see it's off the staging area. If you need a little more information than the -s, take that. So now we decided, I didn't want to commit that yet. We can use git reset with the soft flag. So let's say you want to just take the last commit, the last thing you did out of that commit, which would be this file we just put up there. Okay, so let me scroll up. We want to take the last file out, so soft, and then from the head, the first part of the list, which would be the last thing in, we use that flag. Run your status command, we're back to that. Now, let's commit again. So now, we've committed again a little bit later, and oops, this machine, I just want to scrap what I did on this machine. I don't want to confuse it with other machines. I don't want to confuse it with my GitHub upload. So let's just go ahead and reset this, but with a hard flag. So it makes an update and cleans that file out of there. Let's just try one more git status to make sure. So nothing added to commit, but untracked files are present. Okay, so that shows what the reset command can do. Basically, you've committed some files, but now you want to roll back a little bit, either roll back or start from scratch. So that concludes our reset command discussion. Let's talk about branch management in Git. So Git uses a branch management tool, and the command is branch. And if you think about using different branches to track maybe different environments, or consider your master branch maybe your production code, or if you're tracking documents, maybe your master branch is your book you're writing, and you create other branches for different chapters. Basically, you can create branches, and if you want to go into that branch, you would use a checkout command. So we're going to learn how to walk through creating some branches, and we're going to do a couple commands to look around at what we're doing with branches. So here's a command line for Git. You can go there, or if you're in Unix, terminal window. I'm going to open my bash shell, which brings me right to the master branch. So if I do a git branch, it tells me you're in the master. Now the command git branch test is going to go ahead and create the tests. So if you have the color on in this shell, if you don't have the color on, the color will be the one you're using. If you don't have the color on from your config file, you can see the little star. So now let's do a checkout. Git checkout, and we're going to use test. Now let's go back to the master. check out master. And you do the git branch command again, you see you're back to master. So just to review, branching, if you manage it correctly, can be very helpful. It contains quick pointers to that branch. It's much easier. You don't have to copy all your information into the branch from the previous branch, and you can jump back and forth and add and remove these at will. This concludes our discussion on creating a branch. Okay, so let's talk about Git branches. So we talked about the branch management. If you're coding, and you're going to want to have, the best place is the master branch. So let's learn about navigating around different branches. So let's say your master branch is where you keep all your production code or code ready to upload to GitHub. You've got some other branches, maybe test, staging. Or if you're tracking documents into GitHub, maybe you're writing a book, a novel, or a tech book, and you want to just track different chapters as branches. Let's take a look at the command. We'll learn a few things with navigating through, verifying, and we'll do some steps, some examples here. Right now I'm at the command prompt, which I could use my commands in here. I like the shell. It's a little more colorful, and it brings you right to the master branch initially. So if you have that, let's fire that up. And first thing I like to do is just get a status. Nothing staged. Let's check our branches. Yeah. So right now we have a master branch and a test branch. Let's create a third branch. Dev1. So now you see all the branches are there. So now let's switch over to use Dev1. We'll just check out Dev1. We're switched into Dev1. And if we do a status, shows us everything in there. So now let's check out, let's take a look again at what we have for branches. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah. Did you mean this? Yes. A little help there for people with fat fingers. So let's just do a checkout, and we'll go back to master. So in conclusion, you can move around through branches, and when we start talking about merging, if you have a test branch and you apply maybe a hotfix, different patches, or update the code, you can then merge it into master, and this will all be able to be uploaded to GitHub. So this concludes our discussion about moving in and about different branches. Let's talk about deleting a branch in Git. So I'm going to go to my Windows VM. Now remember, you're going to have local machines, you're going to have maybe a network of machines, you're going to be uploading, downloading to GitHub. So right now we're talking about git, the command, and so for my VM, I'm going to open up, now you could open up a regular terminal window in Unix or a DOS window here. I have the git tools installed. I'm going to use my git shell. And we're going to talk about deleting a branch and go through a few examples. So first we're going to check out what we have for branches. And we see 3 branches. The green highlighted branch is our branch we're currently in. So to delete a branch, and this is just if you're cleaning up your branches, you've got a bunch of branches, maybe you've put your production code in, you've got some test branches, you want to just clean things up. The command is going to be git branch -d branch name, and that's deleted. And we'll take a look here and we'll see that is in fact deleted. So now one thing to watch out, we're going to change over to the dev1 branch. What if you try to delete a branch you are currently in? This is what will happen. It won't let you. And it kind of makes sense. You're actually in the branch. So just watch for that. One last thing you can do on the deletion subject is use the command push. This would be if you wanted to delete a remote branch. So git push, and you want to do the remote name, and then you want to identify the remote branch. So just an FYI, if you want to take something off of a remote machine from this machine you're working on, but you want to clean up some other machines, that's a quick way to delete a branch on a remote machine. So to review, we talked about deleting branches, making sure you're not in a branch, and the error that you would see if you were trying to delete a branch that you were inside, and then how to delete a branch on a different remote machine. So that's it for our deletion section. Let's talk about the merge command in Git. So I'm using my Windows VM, and you can open up a DOS prompt here, or if you're on a Unix box, you can open up a terminal session. I'm going to use my Git tools that I installed, my bash shell, which opens up and shows me what branch I'm in. So the merge command. Let's say we make some changes in a branch and we want to merge them into excuse me, our master branch for production changes. Well, you can use the merge command to do that. You'll still have the other branch. It won't delete the branch, so you can still work in that branch, but you can just sync things up. So we're going to learn the merge. We'll learn how to use the merge command from a high level. It's very powerful, and we're going to do a couple examples. So first of all, we just came in here to the session, so let's just get a status of our master branch repository. We've got nothing to commit. Let's check out our other branches. Whoops. Wrong command. And nicely tells you, hey, did you mean this? Which is a nice feature. So we want to go into dev1 make a couple changes, and then merge them over to master. So we just switched over to the branch dev1 using the checkout command. And this just verifies here in the green that we're using dev1. Also in the yellow up here it shows us. So a quick way to test this would be to add, we'll call it merge, just so we can see it. So we're going to add merge 1. I didn't like that. Let's see, dev1. Okay, what I had to do was I had to VI merge 1 first to create it. Once I VI'd merge 1, put some test info in there using, I like to use VI, but you can use whatever editor you like. Then I was able to add the merge 1 file to be committed. If we scroll up here, we'll see merge 1 is ready to be committed in our dev1 branch. So we'll think of merge 1 as a updating some code, or maybe a new chapter in a book or a new document. So now we're going to commit -a n m for message. Okay, so now we committed. So now let's move back over to the master branch. So we're in master and we want to merge dev1. So you got to be in the branch you want to merge into. So we're going to get merge from dev1. So as you can see, the merge pulled in our merge1 file that was changed, and now you see it in this repository. And as I said before, dev1 is still there, so we can move back into dev1 and do more work and merge it again down the road. Now sometimes if you're merging multiple branches, it can get confusing, and what this does, it pulls in, if you merge from different ones, it'll sync up the snapshots the best it can. Sometimes you may have to look into it and kind of follow what was merged and what was changed and dig down in. And the big thing is the other branches are still there unless you delete them. So you can trace back through if there's an issue or if you overwrite something. But the easiest way is to use a separate branch as a stage branch before you pull things into your production or master branch. Just make sure you have everything you need. So just to summarize, we talked about the merge command and went through a high-level example of editing a branch and then merging into the master branch. This concludes our discussion on the merge command. Okay, let's talk about first time login creation for GitHub. So you want to go to github.com, and we're going to talk about the right hand side, username, email, password. So let's put a username in. I'm going to go with GitHub 2014, and it tells me it's already taken. So let's go with GitHub Fundamentals Training 2014. And for our email address, put your own personal email address in that you'd like to use for notifications in GitHub. If you do a lot of coding, if you're in different projects, you're going to have a lot of people commenting on your code and you're going to be commenting on their code. So you may not want to use a personal one. You may want to set up a separate GitHub ID. It really depends on how much you plan to start using it. And you can always change that down the road. So I'm going to go with my GitHub email, GitHub 2014 at yahoo.com. And if it was already taken, it would have given you that message, already taken. Now I'm going to put in my password. You want to click on Sign Up for GitHub. And by clicking that, you agree to their policy and their terms of service. Okay, so you've completed the step to set up the personal account, and now you just need to take a look at what they offer. I recommend starting out with free because you can always upgrade down the road. If you start doing more coding, getting involved with other projects, you're probably going to have to be in a different account at some point for private repos. And as you see, the free one, you don't get a private repo at all. So if you set up an organization, so they're not personal accounts and they're more for business, and you can, it depends on what you want to do with GitHub. So at some point you may want to do that. I suggest you start free unless you definitely know you're going to be joining an organization or starting one. Start free and then upgrade as you use it. So we've chosen the free one automatically. You can change that if you want. We're going to click on Finish Sign Up. And now we're at the initial UI page. You can see over here it has your ID. And here you can create an organization right off the bat. Up on the right hand side it also mentions your ID. This is the starting page. So just to kind of tie things up, we created an initial login. It's easy enough that we just had a username, an email account, and a password. And we selected what we wanted for a plan. And now we're into the GitHub UI. So this concludes our discussion on the initial login and the initial ID creation for GitHub. Okay, so now let's talk about the GitHub UI, user interface. So you've logged into GitHub, and a couple ways to tell what ID you have in case you forgot, or if you're using multiple IDs, is right here. This is our ID, GitHub Fundamentals Training 2013. It's also a drop down in case you have multiple IDs. Let's say you have a test, a dev, and a prod ID with different repositories. Also up in the right hand side here, you'll see your ID. So over on the right hand side, we've got a sign out icon, account settings, and an icon to create a new repository. Towards the center, you've got the help button. You've got a blog. So you can go to the Git blog, and in here you could search through the posts. There's different pieces you can look for. You could search on, for example, security. And there's a bunch of information about security. Gist is a subset of Git that allows you to share pieces and paste with pieces of your repositories with other people. Explore brings up, similar to the blog feature, but it brings up information about what GitHub is up to. trending. You know, what's popular now, you can kind of search through that. What's trending today. The search or type command could bring you, you could search repositories from here, put a command in, try to figure out more information about it. So once again, let's go with security. This will be much more different than your blog search. Your blog search was searching for blog type information. This is actually repository information. Now back at the UI, we also have a notification button. Right now it says we have no unread notifications, and that would make sense when you initially sign in. Eventually you're going to have possible notifications in here. Towards the middle we've got newsfeed, which is where we are now. Pull requests. If you decide to pull information from your or to another repository, it'll be in here. Issues. Right now there are no issues. You may have some assigned to you from somebody's repository. You may have forked a repository. You may create some issues to track. And stars. These are repositories or areas that use star to have saved for later, and they'll show up in here. So back to the UI, we've also got buttons to walk through setting up Git, which would be set up on your machine, walk through some commands. So this is different commands to walk through and use Git on your local machine to upload, to put your code in your machine, upload into GitHub. Create repositories. This is where you can go to create a new repo. We also saw the top button on the UI had that. Right up here. Fork repositories. This would be repos you find yourself. Maybe you want to contribute to them or fork them. This is where you'd start with that. And there's an area to be social. You can follow a friend, see what code they've done. It brings up everything they're working on. Pull requests, organizations you may join. And then down on the right hand side, this is just as you create repositories, it'll have information there for you. And on the left hand side, it's just got a little more information. And that's it for the UI. So remember, when you come into the UI, typically this button will bring you back to the main UI screen. This is your user ID. This is your sign out screen. Sign out button, excuse me. And we walk through everything in the UI. And this concludes our session on the UI. Now let's talk about our GitHub account settings. So we've logged into the UI and we're at the front screen. And on the top right hand side, we see our user ID, the next icon to create a new repo. The next icon is account settings. So let's select that. So here we've got on the left hand side, you can see several options. Let's walk through each option. So here you've got a public profile. What do you want other developers to see whether it be a company name, a handle type name. So we'll walk through and I'm going to put in, my name will be GitHub training. Email, this will be public. My GitHub training email. URL. I don't have a URL at this point. Company. Location. You've got an avatar here, a gravatar you can change. I'm going to leave mine the same. And do you want to put that you're available for hire? Possibly. Let's check the next setting, account settings. Change password, if you want to do that. Two-factor authentication. So do you want to have a second way to authenticate into GitHub? Now, typically, if you're doing this by yourself, it's not something you want to set up. If you're a company, maybe, just to protect your code or whatever you're putting in GitHub. This would be something that would ask, a second set of security, maybe a question after you log in. Change username. This may come in handy if you decide to become a company. You start out as a personal GitHub account. You want to make it look a little more professional. And delete account. Now, if you delete your account, it looks like there's no going back. You're going to have to log back in, start all over again. If you've got stuff saved in Git, not as big of a deal. You can just upload again. But if you have a lot of your stuff in GitHub, could be a problem. Let's select emails now. Okay. So we've already got your primary GitHub email. You can verify here. You can remove. If you added another one in here, you could remove one of them. So if you want to have multiple emails get alerted for this, you'd add them through here. Now let's select Notification Center. So this is just kind of tweaking how you want to be notified. Do you want to get emailed, get mentioned via the web when you're on a discussion, or when someone brings you in with a mention? Do you want to watch for any updates to certain repositories? And how do you want to be notified? Via email or on this web? And notification email. So here you could drop down and select the ones that you've added in the email settings. And custom routing, you can have different notifications to different verified email addresses. So you could have security emails go to a security email address, development, production, and sort it that way, maybe different people. Now our billing tab once again walks through what you have for a plan and then what possible plans you could upgrade to. Payment history in your account, unless you've signed up for anything besides a free account, this should be like this. SSH keys, unless you add an SSH key, this should be how it looks. Security history. So this is a security log, just explaining what your user did. So device is logged in, and you can check out sessions and revoke them if you don't recognize them. Applications. You can register an application to use the GitHub API. You can create a new token. You can also revoke applications. You revoke gist or other applications. Repositories, this will list your repositories and your organizations, which our ID isn't part of any, and we're not going to turn it into one. If I were to click here, I could make it an organization or create a new one. And we don't have any private repos. So that is it in a nutshell for our account settings. We learned you go to the icon for account settings, and you can walk through on the left hand side all the different pieces to update for your account. So this concludes our account settings session. Okay, let's talk about notifications within GitHub. First, we'll log into www.github.com. I'm going to go in with one of my test accounts. Actually, this is the place to create an account. So I'll go up here to sign in. Got a couple test accounts set up. So notifications. So first off, there are a couple different ways to receive notifications. You can receive them just inside GitHub, or you can also get an email sent to you. Now to set this up, you go to Account Settings, Notification Center. So if you want to get emails for everything when you participate and everything you watch, watching is when you select other projects that you are interested in or you want to participate in, and you also want to watch anything else anyone else does in that project. So a good example of a notification via email notification would be in my Google account. I've got a comment on one of the projects I've been watching, and the person's just making a comment on a part of the project and asking if there's anyone else has any recommendations. Kind of a call out to everybody for some assistance. So back in our settings, so you set that up, and now there are a couple ways to look at notifications. First off, if you go to a repository that you contribute to or one of yours, and you add a comment or make a change or create an issue, then that would set off a notification from you. You go to your home page, you scroll down on the left hand side, these are different notifications that have come. Here's the project name. Here's one from 7 days ago I did with a test repo I created. I opened up a test item, and the main notification page screen is right after your home icon. If this is lit up with a blue, that means you have notifications, and the message says you have unread notifications. So in here it says unread, participating, watched repositories. So you can decide to unwatch, stop watching all. So we'll go into this top notification, and basically somebody in the project is just mentioning an issue they had, and you see some comments. So from here you can go back to your issue list, set up some milestones, ways you may want to help out with the project. Also from in here you can create a new issue over here. Open it up for more discussion. So in a nutshell, what we did was we talked about notifications and the different places we can see them and what they are, and we learned about, you know, the email notifications and the different ways to view them. So this concludes our notification piece. Now let's talk about searching the GitHub repositories, searching for users, projects. So we're going to learn about some of the places you can look around, and then we're actually going to look for some examples. So if you already have a user created, if you haven't, well, if you already have one, we'll sign in. If you haven't, go through this part right here to create your user. I'm going to use one of my test accounts. So the first place to search would be this window up here. Search or type a command. I'm going to search for myself, my ID. You can search for that, or you can search for interests or projects you want to see that are out there, other users. So there are no repositories with that name, but if you click on the left, you see there's code, issues, and users. There are a couple. So it looks like for code, somehow Matthews 44 is listed in this football predictions. Issues would be a couple issues I created, and another one that's just not really related to me. And users, a couple users that I created for test. And it looks like right now I'm not following this user, so I'm going to go ahead and follow that user. And if I decide I want to unfollow somebody in here, click that. So that's one place. There's also advanced search, where you can really drill down. You know, it's something similar to this, Matthews 44, possibly. Let's try from these owners, maybe a repository name created in the last week, last month. What language was it written in? That's a nice one. You know, you want to do things in Python. So I want to narrow things down. I want to search for Android projects with Python. So let's try that. There's a few more options here. Opened by an author, labels, updated before this date. And then user options with this name from this location. So you can really drill in and find what you want. So let's just do a quick one here. Advanced search, let's say Android projects with Python. Let's see what we come up with. And from here, you can drill in to these projects, and you can still maybe try to narrow it down, sort it by different possibilities. Fewest forks, recently updated. Let's go into recently updated, and let's see. Maybe I want, I'll open some of these up. Android crawler. And there's not much in there about it, but you could drill in a little bit more. And let's say you want to get involved with this project. You can watch it, star it, and if you'd like to fork it and use this repository locally, maybe work with it, that's a possibility. So now, that's the first place you can go to search. You can also explore and exploring will bring you trending repositories, what's trending, trending developers, so you can really drill in different ways. And if you're new to this, you can, the best place to do it, once you log in initially, I think if you're new, just look around and see what interests you and watch those repositories, star them. And if you find anything of interest that you want to develop, you could fork or get involved in the initial project. Stars, and those are stars that you have. And down on the bottom left, browse interesting repositories. That brings you back to the explore place. So basically, you can search if you kind of have a feel for what you want, or explore if you don't really know what's out there and you want to just see what's out there. So to review, we went over ways to search in GitHub, and we went through a couple examples. This concludes our piece on searching. Let's talk about creating a repository in GitHub. Now you can set one up locally using the git command line, and once you set one up from within GitHub, you can download and upload locally from GitHub down to your local machine, vice versa. So if you have a login, we'll click on sign in. If you don't, you want to set one up right in this area. I'm going to sign in with one of my test IDs. And the quickest way to set up a repository is to come down on the right hand side and click New Repository. Okay, so now this is your owner, and this is going to be the repository name. If you don't really have any good ideas, GitHub does supply an idea here. If you click on that, it'll put it right up there for you. I'm going to go ahead and call it test repo, and it already exists. Okay, so test repo 24. And you may want to do a description here. It'll help you later on, especially if you're going to have other folks collaborate with you. Now if you choose to make it private, you will have to sign up for a minimum of the micro account. I suggest, if you're just starting out, to go with public, especially obviously if you want to have collaboration and share with folks. You can always go ahead later and make it private. Now if you want to initialize with a README, which I suggest, because then other collaborators can see what you're trying to work on, you select this box here. Now if you don't know yet, if you're new to GitHub, I would not suggest messing with the git ignore section here. This would be a way for you to specify intentionally untracked files that you want to ignore. So files that you don't want GitHub to track. So you may want to go ahead down the road and change that, but for now I leave that blank. Now you can add licenses here too. Initially, you probably don't need to worry too much about it. If you have questions about it, what you can do is click right here, right beside it, and this walks you through licensing. So if you want a simple license, maybe it's the MIT license. If you're worried about patents, maybe you want to get the Apache license. If you continue to scroll down, okay, more choices, I don't want to choose a license. You don't have to. It walks you through everything. So I suggest looking at that if you have any questions. So now we're all set to create our repository. And now you see we've got the repository name, we've got our README, and we have our initial 3-minute ago commit. And from here you could create a file. So this would be a test file, and let's just call it test file. And this is kind of like your editor, like a VI or Emacs. And if you want to make a summary, an extended description is optional. You can go ahead and leave that blank. Commit new file. So now you see you've got some commit history here. So just to review, we went over creating a repository, and from the front page, home page, on the right hand lower side, create repository, you can see we've got our test repo that we created right here. We drill into that. We've got the branch, which is just one branch right now. We could create a new branch in there if we wanted. We've got our committed files, and we're ready to go to work. So this concludes our creating a repository within GitHub section. Okay, let's talk about forking a repository via GitHub. So first we want to log into GitHub, and that's going to be, you go to www.github.com, and if you don't already have an ID, this is the area where you would create a username and a password. If you already have an ID, you want to click on sign in, and I've got a couple test IDs here for this training. So forking. So once you set yourself up in GitHub and you have Git installed locally, you're going to eventually want to contribute to another project, or maybe use a project as a starting point for your own project. So this is called forking. So we'll talk about it a little bit more, and then we'll go through some examples. If you look at the bottom right hand side, you'll see I've got a bunch of repositories that I'm watching, and you see this different icon here for Fluent Security. That actually means it's a fork. So if you click on the fork piece, you'll see that. Now if we open that up, we will see this is a repository forked from the user ID and the same name. So right now I've got it in my branch, and you can see over here it's been forked 26 times. So it is possible to either start this off as my own project, or down the road make some changes here and upload them and sync back up with the initial project. So what I'm going to do now is find another sample repository to walk you through how to create a fork. So I'm just going to find a repository that's trending, and let's go with the Canvas pod. It's been forked 66 times. It's being watched, starred, and we're going to take this project and we're going to say, alright, let's take this project. It looks interesting. It's going to simplify iOS development for both designers and developers. It's got a nice README. And we'll fork it and do some stuff on our end, and maybe down the road work back with the initial designers, or maybe it'll spawn a different idea for us. So all you do is on the right hand side you want to click on fork and fork this repo, and GitHub behind the scenes is doing all that for you, running git commands, and there you go. We've just forked the original Canvas repository. And if you go back to the front, you'll see it in there with your forks. And there you go. Now, if you have questions about that, in the middle section here, in the help, there's a fork repositories piece that you can walk through and walk through the examples and get more help with it. So this concludes our piece on forking. Let's talk about cloning a fork. So first of all, let's log into GitHub. You want to go to github.com, make sure you have a username and password. If not, set it up here. If you do, click sign in. And I've got a couple test IDs that I'm using for the class. So you've got a fork, you've got a couple forks. You can, down here on your right, click on forks. I'll tell you your forks. So they're in GitHub, but you want to pull them down to your machine. So we're going to learn about cloning a fork and go through some examples. So you have a couple forked repositories, but they exist on GitHub, inside GitHub. You want to be able to work on a project and you want to clone that to your local machine. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll leave ourselves logged into GitHub for now, and we'll bring up the command line. Now you can do command line tools, or bring up your GitHub shell. You've got a Git shell that was installed with the tools. So we'll bring that up and we'll pull the fork down. Okay, so we're in our Git command shell. So what we want to do is we want to clone, and we're going to pull it from GitHub. So we want to bring it from github.com, and it's going to be /username and repository. So let's go back and we'll take Canvas. So it's going to be github.com/matthews44/canvas.git. That's the extension you'll give it. So once again, we've forked a repository which we have within GitHub, but now we want to pull it down locally to use here within Git. So let's go with Matthews 44 as our GitHub branch, and canvas.git. Remember that .git as your extension, sorry. This is going to clone the fork of the repository into the current directory in our terminal. And it's going to want you to log in. and did not like that. Let's try to change it up, and we'll give it a capital C. Okay, so there. So on the fly, we've made a mistake. We didn't put exactly what it was called. In this case, it'd be case sensitive with uppercase C, and that worked out for us. So once again, we talked about pulling down a forked repository with the clone command. And we used git clone, and we went from our local repository out to GitHub, and we pulled down the forked repository to work on locally with using Git. And eventually we're going to upload commits and information back to GitHub. So this concludes our cloned fork repository piece. So let's talk about remotes. So you just forked a repository within GitHub, and then to bring it down locally to your machine to work on, you cloned the forked repository. So when you clone a forked repository, it creates a default remote called origin, and that points to the fork on GitHub. But it's not the original repository that it was forked from. So I'll say this again. You clone a repository down to your local machine, and there's a remote created called origin, a pointer that points to your fork on GitHub, but not the original repository it was forked from. So to keep track of the original repository, you need to add another remote called upstream. So right now we've got the information from the clone showing we just cloned the Canvas repository through Matthews 44 on GitHub. So now let's cd into Canvas. Now we want to go through the command to add upstream to the original repository. So git remote, because we're talking now, we're going to go to GitHub. Add upstream, and we're going to actually put in the GitHub and you have to put in where it is. This would be in your repository, not the one you forked from, but the upstream in yours. This will assign the original repository to a remote called upstream. And if you hadn't already logged in above when we did the clone, it may ask you to log in to GitHub as it does that. So now if you use the fetch command from upstream, because it just created the upstream. There's a master branch. It actually fetched that. That pulls in the changes that aren't present in your local repository without modifying your files. So once again, when you clone the repository, the default remote called origin that points to your fork on GitHub is set up. But if you want to have a remote, or you need to have a remote for the original repository, to keep track of the original repository, you add the upstream remote. And you use the fetch command to pull down changes that weren't present or that aren't present locally without modifying files. So this concludes our remote discussion. Let's talk about deleting a repository. So let's go into GitHub, and if you don't have a username or password, if we're talking about deleting repositories, I'm assuming you do, so we'll sign right in. If not, create one right in this area. So a couple important things here to talk about when you delete a repository. Sometimes it may be necessary to remove a fork of a private repository because someone left the organization or stopped contributing. So there's a way to walk through and remove a fork. But remember, it's very important to remember that even if a fork is deleted, the user has and still will retain local clones that they have of your repository. So if you want to have if you have a personal account and you want to remove a fork, you can contact support, request the fork be deleted. You can also delete the repository, which will delete all forks. So remember, this only affects private repositories, not public. So let's walk through deleting a repository. So first you want to go to the repository you'd like to delete. So let me take one of my test repos. And you want to select settings from the repository action bar. And that would be right down here, settings. You want to click delete this repository in the danger zone area. So danger zone highlighted by red, it's trying to let you know this could be bad if you don't mean to do this. And it kind of walks you through, do you really want to do this? It can't be undone. You'll delete the repository, wiki, issues, comments, everything. Please type in the name of the repository to confirm. Now I'm not going to go ahead and do this right now. Actually, this is a test repo, so let's go ahead and do it. Just make sure you see what happens. I understand the consequences. Delete this repository. And a little message here was successfully deleted. Go down here, it's gone. Test repo 24 is a different one, obviously. And that's how you delete a repository. But remember, if it's private, you can delete the entire repository, which will remove all forks. However, if someone has cloned a fork down to their local Git repository, you can't obviously remove that. And you can't do this publicly, just for private repositories. This concludes our how to delete a repository piece. Let's talk about publishing commit history and changes with push. So we're going to learn a little bit about push and what you can do with it. And then we're going to take a look at an example. So first of all, let's log into GitHub, github.com. And if you don't already, by now you should have a login. If you don't, you can create one right in this area. I'm going to use my test login. And we're going to take a look at a repository from in here that we're going to push to. So, we've been using Canvas, the fork of the Canvas project that I've cloned locally to my local machine, where I can use Git to update and make changes, and then we can push it back up to GitHub. So when you push to a remote, you need to have a repository on GitHub to push to, and you want to make sure it's not read-only. So this Canvas one is one we can work on as an example. So if you go locally to a command prompt locally to your machine, or if you want to open up your Git bash shell, which I have open right here, and I'm in the Canvas project, what you can do is push changes up to GitHub. Now this is just a test push. We're not going to actually push anything up, but this would be the command: git push. This is your GitHub remote address. Matthews44 is my subdirectory, my project directory, and I have Canvas forked up there. And it's coming from the master branch here to the master branch there. So let's hit enter. Now it's going to ask you to log in to GitHub. So remember, you're local and you're logging in to the GitHub site from local. So you want to make sure you have your network set up and all that. And you see it says everything up to date. If we would have made more changes and pushed the changes, it would have shown you a little bit more. Let's do another example of a remote push. So as you can see in Canvas, we have a README file. I'm going to go into the README code and I'm going to make a change and push it up here, and we'll actually view the change. So let's go into the README. I'll VI README. You can use whatever text editor you'd like. I'm going to insert a plus sign right after demo app. This will cause this entire line to be seen in the README file. I'll make my change. So now we can do git status first, and the status will show us there's a file to be committed. And now let's commit it, and we'll give the tag name, the message test. And now let's push that to GitHub. And a lot of times it likes you to log in. If you've already logged in, you're doing a lot of different work, it may not ask you every time. So remember, this is all done remotely right now. This is all on your machine. But this last command pushed it up to GitHub. So now let's go to GitHub. We're already logged in. We're in the master branch of the Canvas on Matthews44's fork. So once again, when I first come in, I can go over to the lower right hand side and I see repositories that I'm working on and forks. And if you want to sort it out, you can sort through all these different pieces, and we'll sort on forks, and we'll click on Canvas. And the file we did change was README, which is already open down here. If you scroll down, you will now see this line that I added. So I'll really quickly go back and take that line out and push it back. So we'll take this X out. We'll save that file. We'll commit it up. So it's committed locally, and now we will push it to GitHub. And we have to log in again. And there's your message. It worked. And we can refresh, reload, and we shouldn't see that plus anymore. And there you go. So in a nutshell, we talked about pushing remotes up to GitHub, and we did an example here, and this concludes our discussion on pushing information from your local machine up into GitHub. Let's talk about using pull requests from within GitHub. So first you want to go to github.com, and if you don't already have a username, by now you should, but if not, set up a username and password. And if you do, let's log in and take a look at some pull information. So first off, when you first come into your main page, you do see a pull requests section that I'll click on right now, just to show you that that's one way to get to current pull requests. So let's talk about pull requests. We'll learn a little bit about them, and then we'll look at a couple examples. Pull requests allow you to tell other people involved in a repository project that you've pushed changes to a repository. So once a pull request is sent, any interested parties can review the changes, discuss potential modifications, and maybe even push follow-up commits. So first off, I'll just show you a couple commits here. Let's go to test security, which is one of my test repositories. And you see on the right hand side you've got pull requests. So what I did is I went ahead and created a test branch and made some changes in that branch and created a pull request. So from the pull requests, you can take that pull and assign it. So let's assign it to myself. You can create milestones. So let's give it a week. This is the commit information about an hour ago. Down the road, you could possibly merge this. This is saying you could check this out using GitHub for Mac, because I am on a Mac. Here you can write comments based on what you've seen. If you click here, you see the commit, and you can check out the files changed. So in this branch, I created this file. Here you can check the diff stats. Really not much there. So let's go back up here. So basically that's in a nutshell a pull request. So we're going to initiate another pull request and review it. And let's walk through that. So let's create a new branch. Now it's very simple in GitHub to create a branch. In Git it's a little more complicated, and that brings up another thing. This is all stuff we're doing. These changes are all from within GitHub. Once you do your pull requests or receive a pull request from other folks and you do the commits and things are all the way you want them, you're going to want to make sure you push changes down to your local machine. So once you have things the way you want them up here, you want to work on the code locally, you want to make sure you sync that up with a push. So you see here we've got some branches: pull test, master, test. If we create another branch, we'll call it pull test 2. Just click here to create it. So in order to do this pull request, we'll do it from within pull test 2, that branch, as our new branch. So we're making some modifications in a new branch. So we're going to create a new file here. I'm going to call this pull test. Now from within here you can type it up. It's kind of like an editor, like a VI or Emacs or a Windows editor. So we're just going to take this file, and down here you want to summarize your commit. Pull test. It had create pull test already there. You could leave that. And we're going to commit this file. So now it mentions you've got a couple push branches here, and it already pretty much tells you, hey, do you want to compare these branches and do a pull request? In here, this just shows the pull request you already have, and from here you could do a new pull request. So let's do a new pull request. So let's compare the master branch to our new branch, and right up it brings up, okay, this is the file in the new branch, it's not in master. So right here, click to create a pull request for this comparison. So you look at it, yes, I do want to merge this into master. Pull request. And it also tells you these branches can be automatically merged. But let's hold on and do a pull request and have other folks involved in this project verify that they want this to happen. Now if it's just you doing the code, okay, I'll just do this right here. I'll merge it. Let's just we're just going to request other folks in the project take a look. And once again, we could assign, or someone else could assign to them. We could edit. We could eventually merge. We can look at the commits. Files changed. So this gets a little complicated if you go back and look. You've got, this is my base page. This shows what I've been doing, activity, pull requests, commits. So you see I've got 2 pull requests. Each one in this case is a test file on different branches. So you can already see how it could get complicated. So possibly folks don't really want one of those files to go in, but the other one they do. So you got to be able to remove one that you don't want to do and merge the other. So pull test. As you see, I closed this pull request. And it gives you the nice red everywhere, hey, it's closed. So I decide I don't want to do that one. Now I still have all the information. I still can get the file. I could create it again, but I don't want to use that one. I want to just go with this one. I'm going to end up, if people like it, I'm going to end up merging it back in. So to review, we walk through a couple ways to do a pull request. From the main page, you go to your repository and it tells you right off, hey, you can compare a pull request, or you go to the pull request section here and do a new pull request. We walked through how to close one, and we talked about why you would do a pull request. And the one thing you have to remember is this is all in GitHub. If you want to code locally, you need to pull that down to your local machine. This concludes our discussion on pull requests. Let's talk about merging a pull request. So let's go ahead and log into GitHub. If you don't already have a login, you should log in right, create a username and password right here, or we'll just sign in. There's a couple ways to get to pull requests. You can click on pull requests right here, or from the home screen you can go to the repository you're working with and click on pull requests. So to open this up, you click on the name. Now, to review, we did a pull request of 2 separate branches, and the file this is the file we changed, and now we want to merge that into our master from our test branch. And in a pull request, you typically make the request and assign to somebody, possibly. In this case, it was assigned to myself for a week, and maybe possibly get some, do a preview, or folks maybe make comments about the pull request and they don't think it should happen. They think it should happen, they think this should be changed first. So now we've decided that everything looks good and we want to do the merge. So you just want to go ahead and click on merge pull request once you're sure that it's been reviewed and it's what you want to do. And basically from there you can enter any more commands you'd like. Merge on 1, 2, 3 and confirm the merge. So once you've merged, you also can go ahead and delete that branch, because now everything's merged into your master branch. So let's go ahead and finish that off and clean this up. As you can see, I closed one I did a merge commit, and I actually had closed one as well. So let's go ahead and delete the branch. And now that's been deleted. And if you'd like to restore it, say, oh, you know, maybe I shouldn't have deleted that, you can restore it, and there it is. And you can always go back and delete it again. So that's it for, you know, we talked about merging branches you've already committed, you've set up, and they're ready to put into the master branch, or whatever you want to call your main branch. And we went through an actual example and merged it and talked about deleting and cleaning things up afterwards. So that's it for our discussion on merging branches. Let's talk about transferring repositories. So first we'll log in. If you don't have a username and it's a login, set that up right in this area. I'll go ahead and log in. And that would be at github.com. So we want to, maybe we have a new user we set up. Maybe we created an organization now called GitHub Training, and we want to transfer repositories into that. There are reasons sometimes to want to move repositories around. So I'm going to go into my test security repository and click on settings. From within settings, I want to make sure I could first maybe change the name. If I wanted to rename, I could alter it and click rename. Here I'm not going to do that. I want to leave my default branch as master. I could alter that as well. I could read these features and make changes. I'm going to leave them all the way they are. Now down in the danger zone is where you can transfer. So the danger zone, obviously that's the place where the biggest things happen, and you want to be careful when you see red in GitHub. So first of all, right now the repository is public. There's a possibility you want to go ahead and make this private, so we can check that out. Basically we have the free account right now, but if you wanted to, you could go ahead and credit card or annually get billed and go to a larger account. If you're new to this, I suggest you stick with a free account until you find the need to, if you start trying different features and it wants you to upgrade, then I would suggest upgrading. But until you find the need for that, I would stick with a free account. Also, if you want to delete the repository, you can go ahead in here and delete that. But we're going to transfer. So to transfer, it's going to want the name again to verify. Now I set up a test owner. I understand, transfer this repo. Oops, some kind of an error there, so we'll go back. We'll try it again. Sometimes you get an error from GitHub and you hit back or refresh. That should clear it up. So that's a good example of it. We'll try it one more time. Now I'm assuming it's some kind of network issue. That's the reason why it's not, because it's going to want to transfer this and it's not. Okay. But this gives you a real life example of troubleshooting on a small scale. You know, it's just a network glitch, but sometimes you'll get these errors like that. Okay, so it finally went through. So now you look and you see, oh, it is actually being transferred to this user, and you have a chance to abort it. So let's try that. As you see, it was aborted. It's still available now. And we could go and transfer it again. So to review, we talked about repositories, and sometimes we have a need to transfer them from a user to a user to an organization, several different ways. And we talked about where to go to do that, and the red, anytime you see red, pay attention. And we did an actual transfer and aborted. And that concludes our transfer section. Let's talk about following friends and developers in GitHub. So there is a social aspect of GitHub that you can look at GitHub employees, projects, random projects, friends you know who are on GitHub, possibly an organization. So let's go ahead and log in. If you don't have a login, this is the area where you would set one up. You can sign in up top. So there are a couple ways to find people. You can look at projects. You can search. Let's try to search for one of my IDs. So as you can see, this is another ID I made, a test ID. And I am currently following him. There's not a lot of activity going on, not a lot of repository contributions, activity. So we could always unfollow and follow. That's how easy it is. So we talked about following folks and looking at projects. So let's look somebody up. This person I know is part of the GitHub organization. So you see we found this username associated with 108 repositories, all these different languages, all kinds of code, and other users associated with that user. So let's drill in. And find the actual MDO user. Okay, here we go. So Mark. So right here you could follow him. There's multiple people here, and it'd be easy as if it's a certain language you want to drill down into and follow some people, you will get the notifications for commits and what they're working on. So if you're new, I suggest you find somebody that does a lot of commits so you can get kind of a feel for day-to-day activities. You know, find somebody in your with your interests or some different projects that you're interested in. Just kind of watch what they're doing. So here's Mark's activity. Plenty of things going on, plenty of activity, repositories. So we can go ahead and just follow him. And now we'll plug into what he works on. So once again, GitHub has a social aspect. There are, as you see, look at its followers, 2.3K. So there's thousands of people, thousands of developers out there, projects. And if you're new, you can get involved with the organizations and the developers and see what they're doing. So this concludes our social following piece. Let's discuss watching a particular project. So first, let's log in, create a new user ID here, or sign in up top. And so watching as opposed to following. What's the difference? Well, following is more following particular people. Yes, you will see projects, and if you're working with somebody, a coworker or a friend, you'll also be watching projects, but you're actually following the friend. So what if there's a project you like or something out there that you want to keep tabs on, and it could be 1,000 followers of that same repository? This is where you'd want to watch the repository. So let's go ahead and find a repository. Now I've got repositories down here, but they're all created by me. So let's find one out there. We can look for something that, let's see, if we look for something, a project we may want to watch. This Android project, but I think maybe I'm already, let's see. Yes, I'm already watching, so I could unwatch, not watching, or I could watch but ignore conversations, notifications for conversations. It would cut down on the notifications I would get. So let's find something else, a different one here. All right, that's searching within the repository. So we'll go back one more level. We'll take this one right here and we will watch it. So we'll change it to watching. So now we will see commit information. We will see comments, different types of information. I can show you real quick. In my email, I've got tons of comments. So they do, here's one right here. So you do get a lot of notifications. I've noticed probably 25 to 50 a day. Sometimes that could be just a couple repositories. So you want to try to think about which ones you really want to watch. So this one just, somebody put some information out there, and sometimes they're looking for more information or for some assistance. So just to review, if you follow somebody, you could be following somebody's, if they could be doing multiple repositories, multiple pieces of code, and you're following that person. But if you want to watch a particular repository, that would just watch what a bunch of people are doing in that repository. And if you look down here, these are also messages from repositories I'm watching and information I'm doing on my repos. So this concludes our watch discussion. So let's talk about creating issues. So you've created a repository and now you're working on code in the repository, and you're going to track issues or modifications, things you've changed or problems you're having. So possibly someone else could fork your repository and possibly help you create or fix these issues and sync it back up with your repository. So let's learn about where we can go to do this and do a couple examples. So let's go ahead and log in. If you don't have a username, the right hand side is where you set it up. So now, repositories, I've got one here that I've forked. And if I go to the original repository, on the right hand side you see issues. So I can take a look at what issues they may have had. Now I can check these issues out and maybe write a comment like, I'd like to take care of this one, or I have a fork with that issue resolved, I can merge back to you, stuff like that. Now you can also create a new issue. So something you'd like to bring up, maybe you've noticed when you forked it or in this original repository. It's just a matter of giving it a title and leaving your comment. You can preview it if you'd like, and you submit. And we can also take a look at the repository that I have that has 0 issues. There's also an issue that you can assign, create, mention, and there's different labels you can give them. And when you go to your home page, you can also click on issues here, and that's going to bring up a little dashboard of issues. You can sort. So in a nutshell, we talked about issues and why you'd set them up. And we went through some examples, walked you through how to create an issue. And this concludes our issue discussion. Let's talk about GitHub organizations. So once you get acclimated to GitHub and you've looked around and you've worked on some repos and forked some other repos, and now you like to collaborate with some developers on a project. What you can do is you can manage everything with an organization. In an organization, you can establish teams with special permissions, and you can have a public organization profile and keep track of activity within your organization. So let's log in and take a look at organizations a little more and look at some examples. If you haven't already set up a username and ID, this is the area, and I'm just going to sign in up top. So organizations. If you had organizations, if I had one set up here, it would be in my drop down. I could switch to that. And you can create it right from there. Now, if you set up an organization, you're going to have to go ahead and move up to, or I guess select the organization's plan. And you'll have to decide which one makes the most sense if you want to have private repos. If you want to stay public, you can create a public organization. I'm not going to set one up right now. But let's take a look at some organizations. So that user, MDO, we see a couple organizations here. He's part of the GitHub organization, Twitter. So let's check out GitHub. So we see we have 117 public repos, 223 members. And here's your members up here. And these are people that you may want to follow. Drill down in to see what they're working on. And if you set up an organization, you can invite them, tell them about your organization. So just to cover once more, an organization helps you establish teams, and you can give special permissions and pull together developers to help work on a project and track activity. And this concludes our discussion on organizations. Let's talk about adding or changing the avatar. So right now for Matthews 44, I have a default avatar. If you look down through here, these different folks have, typically it's a picture of yourself, but not always. Another example would be if I pick somebody who works at GitHub and go to an organization and show you the members in the organization, you've got all different, pretty much selfie pics, but different things. So if you click on the upper right hand side on your name, on your ID, it'll bring you to a kind of a dashboard of activity. If you click over your avatar, it's going to go to Gravatar, where I'm already logged in. If you don't have a login for WordPress, it's going to want you to log in initially. It's going to send you a email to your account to activate. Once you activate, you can log in. Now it says here I don't have any images here yet, so I'm going to try to add one by clicking, and I'll try to get one off my computer's hard drive. I'm going to try to grab one of my headshots. And upload that as my avatar. Okay, that seemed to have an error, so I grabbed another image that's smaller. We'll see if that one works. And you want to remember what you post for images, what you put up there for an avatar reflects your work and you professionally. So if you're looking to meet other developers, you may want to be kind of careful about what you put out there. Now you can crop the view, so I'm going to move it up a little bit and select finish. Give it a rating. And now, let's see. So that's how you would change your avatar. You have to go into this site and modify it. So we just talked about avatars in GitHub and what types you may want to use and how you where you would go to try to make changes to it. This concludes our avatar discussion.